Hi everyone. We're going to start. Welcome to this webinar of the CIV's Transformational Change Learning Partnership, or TCLP, as we call it. My name is Nasiba Chemor, and I am a lead facilitator for the TCLP. I am quite excited for today's webinar because today we will explore pathways to catalyze transformational change into climate finance. And we will learn about different transformational change frameworks, and we will also hear from examples on the ground of climate finance programs. So to achieve this, we will have the opportunity to hear from experts from two major development actors. The first is Jonathan Cooney from the World Bank and Daniel Keha from GIZ. And we'll hear about their journeys on transformational change for climate finance and sustainable development, and also how they are helping their organizations to approach and also support transformational change. After their presentations, we will open up the conversation to all of our participants to learn from your insights and also your experiences on the topic. I want to encourage all participants to engage with our speakers and also among yourselves, both in the chat box and through video. And for that, we have some technical reminders that I want to share with you. First off, please note that this webinar is being recorded. Also, if you can rename yourself, after your name, you can add the name of the organization that you represent. Don't forget, please, to mute yourselves while others are speaking. And if you want to participate, use the raise hand feature that you'll see on your tools. And if you have any technical issue at all, please contact my colleague Shelby Thomas in the chat, and she'll be able to help. So to kick off this webinar, I want to invite Michael Ward. He is the TCLP lead from the CIV, and he'll provide some welcoming remarks. So Mike, over to you.
Thanks so much, Nasibe, and it's really great to have so many familiar and new people joining us today. For those of you that are new to the TCLP, I think just to say that it's a learning community established by the Climate Investment Funds to deepen, advance, and promote our understanding of transformational change in climate action. And since 2017, the TCLP has brought together a network of over 400 people representing many different sectors, NGOs, multilateral development banks, private sector, public sector, from over 150 different organizations. So in 2021, the TCLP is working to advance our understanding of transformational change, and really, I think, shifting into supporting the uptake of transformational change understandings into program design and project design, implementation processes, as well as monitoring and evaluation. Key part of this is really trying to strengthen the collaboration on the transformational change learning program. So it's great to have everybody here today. And really, I think, reflects the increased urgency and need to realize transformational change across climate action in the context of really severe climate change that we face. So we're doing this through a number of different mechanisms, webinars like this one, topical interest groups that pick up on key issues that we're probing and trying to understand better, workshops, analytical work and writing, case studies, and stakeholder engagement. So at the end of this webinar, we'll provide some more details on how to get involved, and really hope that many of you do, as well as upcoming events. So just again, to say a very big welcome to our speakers, welcome to all of you as participants. We look forward to active engagement in the discussion. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Nasibe, who will be moderating today's event.
Thank you, Mike. As Mike mentioned, and as some of you are aware, there has been so much work among the TCLP community. And as also you may know, over the past months, the TCLP has updated its transformational change framework. And this includes a couple of elements. First, a working definition of transformational change in climate action, also the dimensions of transformational change, and finally, some key insights to improve understanding of transformational change that are relevant to climate action. To provide some background, I'm gonna briefly touch on some of these elements. First, you can see the working definition on your screens. It basically refers to a fundamental change in systems that are relevant to climate action with large-scale positive impacts that shift and accelerate the trajectory of progress towards a climate neutral, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development pathways. And it's important to note that this is a working definition, so of course it evolves as needed. Also, we can talk about the dimensions of transformational change in climate action. They are defined as attributes of change within systems to address climate change. So according to the TCLP framework, these 5 dimensions that are relevance, systemic change, scale, speed, and adaptive sustainability, they can vary in prominence, they can vary in magnitude, and they can be based on the context or the timing of an initiative. They are not set in stone, so to speak, but they all need to be present in some level to say that such climate action is, in fact, transformational. Also, one important thing to note is that the relationship among these dimensions can be very nuanced, but they often interact, they overlap, and even they help advance each other. The framework also brings some insights for understanding transformational change that it's important to share. For example, that the level of transformation needed to address the climate crisis is quite ambitious, and it requires following changes in both natural systems, but also human systems. Also, one thing that was noted is that incremental changes or reforms are not necessarily transformation, but an incremental change that is, for example, well-timed can actually lead to transformation. Another interesting thing is that positive changes at, for example, the household or the community level are of course relevant, but we need to follow up. We need to scale these events at levels that can address the urgency of climate action, of course. And we also need to be ready for shifts in power relations and decision-making processes that, because this naturally comes with transformational change. And while the transformational change goals might keep steady at the long term, the focus and the targets, they need to evolve in line with how the contexts are changing. We also need to be aware of the different timeframes and speeds of transformational change and actually be able to respond to that. On that line, we understand that the projects operate in context where several actors are interacting, and they also have different needs. And to achieve transformational change, we need to develop the skill set to navigate all these interactions. And finally, one thing that is quite important to consider is that we need to recognize the extent, however limited or not, in which human systems can influence change within natural systems. We need to be aware of that, and we need to adapt our programs and our initiatives if we want to achieve or contribute to transformational change. So all these insights and elements that I am mentioning are within a document, which is summarizing the concepts and insights. And it will be available soon. And of course, we are happy to share it with all the webinar participants. So this framework that I just briefly explained seeks to provide some guidance for project design and implementation in an effort to bringing it closer to achieving transformational change. Of course, this is just one of many efforts, as the work of the World Bank and GIZ will show us. But over the last couple of years, there has been significant activity to develop thinking and concepts for applying transformational change to climate finance. Among the three frameworks that we will present today, we have been able to identify that they align in some areas. For example, the understanding that transformation does not mean more of the same, or a system that was old and that was in place before and it's adapting. It is a process that we find it was rather disruptive, and sometimes it's fully achieved only when it is scaled, when it is mainstreamed, and eventually when it is considered as the dominant system. We also identified in all three frameworks that these transformations are quite complex, and often they are not, quite often, they are not linear processes. They involve fluctuations, and they can emerge abruptly, and they are hard to predict, and often they lead to a whole new system, which is good. A critical aspect is the need for an approach that is holistic, meaning that all sectors and levels of society involved need to interact. They need to be considered in this change for transformation to happen. And on that note, all three frameworks recognize that transformational change must consider social and economic issues around it, such as, distribution of income and wealth, gender issues, power dynamic and participation, socioeconomic vulnerabilities, employment, ethnicity, and so on. So from this conceptual work that we will be discussing today, we have what we sometimes call the what. And now to move on, we are focusing on finding the how. How do we catalyze? How do we contribute? How do we support transformational change in climate finance? And we can tackle this in two ways. You're gonna hear a noise outside. I'm sorry about that. From the top down, we can analyze how climate finance processes can incorporate thinking about transformational change. For example, within its program design, its long-term planning, its country plans, its project cycles, or even in evaluation, monitoring, and assessment. Or we can look at it from the bottom up. And that means collecting knowledge from climate action at ground level on what is contributing to transformational change, take that knowledge and incorporate it to program and project design. So we do recognize that achieving transformational change is a high bar, and we are working and striving towards. And right now we are coming across findings and insights and ideas that can contribute to that goal. But we also understand that advances at a systems level involves so much work, and it needs to be consistent, and it needs to be sustained over time. So even if we put our pieces in place, we might not see evidence of transformational change right away, or even at a medium term. As I mentioned before, this is not a linear path. And right now we are learning about the key elements that we need to consider if we aspire to catalyze transformational change into climate action. And with this, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Jonathan Cooney. He is a senior climate finance specialist and global lead for green competitiveness at the World Bank Group. So Jonathan, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Lovely. Well, thank you, Nasibe. And I'm just going to time myself here. And thank you so much for all of you to join. We're all very busy these days, so appreciate you taking the time to join our webinar. There are my slides. When you talk about transformation in the climate sector, it goes very quickly to how exactly are you going to finance it. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. We've done some analysis within the World Bank group and worked with others to come up with a framework and a blueprint on how you can use climate finance to have the most catalytic impact and the most transformative impact. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. Next slide, please. Okay, what exactly is climate finance? I think if you were to ask a dozen different climate finance experts for a definition, you'd probably get 24 different answers. So I'm just going to go ahead and define it as any funds used by developing countries to meet their climate goals. And I'll break that down further into the grouping on the left, which is international public climate finance, finance that goes through the MDB systems, MDBs such as the World Bank, and then another category of climate finance buckets on the right there, which the goal is to catalyze that as much as possible. And that's a theme I'll continue to come back to throughout the presentation, how we use that money on the left, which we can control, to catalyze the money on the right. And if you look at the money on the left, there's two buckets there. One is dedicated climate finance, which is money that comes from, for example, the CIF and the Green Climate Fund that would be concessional in nature and prioritizes climate goals. And then the bucket on the right, which is development finance with climate co-benefits, which is MDB balance sheet investments, the same processes and terms that we do for all of our loans, but that are tagged as having climate impacts in the host country. So again, I'll keep coming back to this theme of using those two buckets on the left to catalyze the two buckets on the right. Next slide, please. And the reason that we need to do this catalyzation is that the available public climate finance falls short of the needs. There's no other way to look at it. You can see those dots on the right correspond to the buckets that I was just talking about. Dedicated climate finance from the CIF and the GCF is about $3 billion a year. The balance sheet investments from the MDBs with climate co-benefits is about $60 billion a year. They directly and indirectly mobilize $20 billion. So we're looking at about $85 billion a year of investment. But the need, it's a lot of different estimates on that, but it's measured in the trillions. This is some 2.9 trillion annual investment needs we came up with. So you're not even close. And there's no realistic way to say, okay, we're going to get the governments of the donor countries to give in the trillions of dollars a year for developing countries to address their climate needs. So we need to be more catalytic with the available money that we have. Next slide, please. Now, the good news is that climate sectors and the use of climate finance have the potential to be highly catalytic and highly transformative in relation to other sectors in the development community. For example, health or education or energy, regular energy. And there's 4 reasons that we have this tremendous catalytic potential. One is that the private financial interest in clean tech is enormous and growing. We all see these announcements. BlackRock, for example, other high-profile funds say we're going to go climate. A lot of surveys are done on this. About 1/3 of the assets under management, more or less, come back to say, yeah, we're going to have pretty strong climate preferences or mandates. Of the $400 trillion of investments out there, or money-seeking investments, a full quarter of it, or 100 trillion, have signed on to the UN's Principles for Responsible Investment, which have a very clear environmental and climate focus. So if you can use your public climate finance to get the conditions right, there's a wave of private finance dying to invest in good climate projects. Second reason is technological dynamism and growth. We've all seen the story with solar energy. The public money can make the green tech competitive or better value with brown tech, and then public doesn't need to do anymore. And other technologies are now following the path of solar. Green growth, economic benefits, greater efficiencies, jobs, resilience to shocks, all of the things that you do to address climate also have multiplier effects for the economy in general. That's a tremendous driver for transformation. And finally, the last point is the novelty of climate actions. Let's not forget that Climate change has been addressed in earnest for the last 20, 25 years, but the sectors in which it's working, whether it be energy or agriculture, have been going on for decades and generations. All of the system is geared towards fossil fuel economy. When you start to change that, you'll get a powerful follow-on effect, and whether that change is a new regulatory environment, demonstration of a technology, building or capacity. Therefore, if you make those initial changes, a lot of activity will follow. So next slide, please. Now we have to address the elephant in the room here, and that's COVID, of course. All of the economic downturns related to COVID and the fiscal stimuli taking place around the world, domestically and internationally, to address that downturn really speak for the need to be much more catalytic with our public funds, right? We're spending all of this money now, but it's still not on a level, an order of magnitude, what we need to address climate change. And in addition, that public well of money is not inexhaustible. Government's going into major deficits here. They won't have public money to spend with such abandon going forward. So we need to be much more catalytic about it. Cited in this slide, a recent IFC report, which looks how to build back better, and really got at, I thought it was a very good report. It really got at the fact that, okay, let's build back better, but it's not just a climate issue. You're getting all of these jobs, all of these investment, all of this private sector development activity. So it's not something separate from responding to COVID. It's very much intertwined, and it really speaks to the necessity of being as catalytic as possible with the limited public funds that we currently have. So next slide, please. So that's all great, nice story. How do we do it? There's a lot of analysis out there doing it. We're not the only one, but I just wanted to cite two reports we put out recently on this subject, which develop blueprints on exactly what I'm proposing here, using your international public climate finance as catalytically as possible. One, the strategic use of climate finance to maximize climate action, came out a couple years ago. We released a follow-on report on transformative climate finance, launched last June. And again, the idea is to take this hypothesis, this theory, this approach, and be specific exactly on how you do that. So that's what I want to talk about now. So next slide, please. Great. In the report that we released in June, Transformative Climate Finance, what we did was do a deep dive, or first define the ways in which climate finance going through the MDB systems to developing countries can be spent. There's been a lot of siloing in this area. So the energy people say, hey, we just need clean energy people. The financial sector people say, hey, we just need to set the conditions to trigger commercial investments. The fiscal people say, put a tax on it, let the market respond, and so forth. The innovation people say, we just need to build a better mousetrap. So what we did is we did a deep dive into this taxonomy of the 8 different ways in which climate finance can be dispersed, and looked at exactly how it can be catalytic or less so. We had not seen an analysis that took this broad view, but rather a niche or siloed look at all of those. So based on those deep dives into how to be catalytic in each of the 8 different drivers or levers, we came up with blueprints on exactly how it could be done. So the next slide, please. So here's the high-level findings for how to be transformative with your climate finance. The first is plan for the long terms. Nasib touched on this. The incentive for all the stakeholders in these projects are quick short-term returns, whether it's the donors, the MDBs, or the host countries. Of course it is. We all have pressures. I think Nasib was a little diplomatic to say sometimes short-term goals do not align with the long-term goals needed for transformation. I would say sometimes they're in opposition to it. So someone needs to step in and take us out of the short-term project scope. You need a balance. The second one is you need a balanced allocation among the levers. The large majority of the climate finance is going to project-based infrastructure. This is fantastic. But the other levers, the other 7 levers, as opposed to the one on project-based blended finance, are really need to do more, and we need to balance that out and do it all in concert together. It's not one versus the other. The third one is use a range of financial instruments. If you look at the data from OECD or others, the large majority of climate finance is debt financing. And I think this is a question of, to a person with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And for the MDBs, what's the bread and butter? They do big loans, debt, some equity, but debt primarily to developing countries. That's not always the best way to do it. Using guarantees can be much more catalytic. Even grants, where you say, okay, well, we're going to give you this money with these expectations, but you don't have to pay it back. So we need to think about spreading out the range of financial instruments. And finally, we need to look at leverage on a systemic rather than a project basis. This requires a new methodological approach, and it's not easy, but climate change will not be solved on a project by project basis. So we have to look at the impacts, not on a project by project basis. And next slide, please. Yeah. So let me get into a little bit more specifically on how you would use climate finance, again, this public climate finance, in core DFI projects or MDB projects to get the catalytic impacts you want. And let me stress again, those catalytic impacts do bring meaningful climate change impacts. It helps the countries address climate change, but also is linked to development goals as well. So let me just run through them. The first one is a classic infrastructure project. It can be a power plant, it can be a port. You go ahead and do it. But wait, if you add the climate finance strategically and intelligently, whether it's technical assistance to understand new options, guarantees is very, very powerful. In the climate change group, we're working with our infrastructure colleagues to design a guarantee scheme that can be rolled out to all infrastructure projects that have climate benefits, or you can do more concessional blended finance at the project level. And if you go over to the right there, what are the impacts? High private finance leverage, and that's not just a climate impact, but a development impact as well. Greater resilience to shocks, again, not just a climate impact, but profound benefits to economic development. The example down at the bottom is financial sector. We've been working for decades, for generations, with developing countries to set up robust financial sectors, adding a smidgen, if you will, of public climate finance to make them greener is going to have tremendous impact. And what can you do there? Again, the technical assistance is important. People are learning here. We're dealing with decades, generations, centuries of inertia on this to deal with climate change, so that helps. Green development banks are very, very powerful. Green bonds is tremendous hype over green bonds. Some people are now pushing back saying, maybe there's too much hype there, but so be it. The green asset taxonomy, the EU has been leading here. They just released their taxonomy last 6 months or so. Getting developing countries to have the same, it can be very powerful. And again, the catalytic impacts are not just climate change, but exactly what you would need to drive economic development. Greater FDI, greater financial sector capacity, the funds for domestic investment or investment in local firms. Let me make a point here. I'm going to go to the next slide, but I wanted to make a point here. Perhaps I should have had a separate slide for it. But there's this notion of just transition, which we in the World Bank, and we all take very seriously, but it's really, really important to make that front and center and not an add-on. Another of the high-level findings that I gave before, another one that we have sort of a different version of this presentation is spend your grant money, spend your concessional money to ensure just transition, even if it doesn't give direct climate results. There will be winners and losers in this transition. We know that. If it's just lip service, not only is it unjust, but we will not succeed because we run into political economy issues. So I wish I'd been more explicit in the presentation here, but all of those catalytic impacts would cover a just transition. So next slide, please. No, I think you jumped one. Yeah, here we go. Thanks. Two more examples of the 8 climate levers we identified. Fiscal policy, again, this is something we've worked with governments for decades on. Applying climate finance to address fossil fuel subsidy removal and or carbon tax through various means can have great impact. When you remove fossil fuel subsidies or add carbon tax, you will get losers, and that can include both vulnerable groups, marginalized groups in your society. You must protect them, and you can use climate finance to protect them. You also have carbon intensive industries, and if those go down because you put in a carbon tax, the economic consequences are devastating on a regional basis or even a national basis. Spend the money you have to take that into account, and you get these wider economic impacts. And finally, the one on the bottom, innovation. Oops, thank you, Steve. Innovation and private sector development. We've been doing this for decades. If you steer that activity to the hottest sectors in the world today, which are clean tech sectors, you will get much more bang for your buck. You want those developing country SMEs and companies pursuing where the money is, where the growth is. The growth already in these sectors is monumental. The money to invest in these sectors. So you want to direct your private sector there, your innovation efforts there as well, again, for climate benefits and development benefits. So last slide, I just have one more. So what are we doing to implement these principles that I'm telling you about? Well, we've developed a methodology to do a climate finance diagnostic at both the country level and the sector level, where you follow this 3-step process, and you go in and you map or identify the required climate and development steps you need. If it's in a sector, you say, okay, I need to get here. We need to get here in order to be clean and drive development. This is the longer term. It's not a shorter term look. It's a 3,000 volume, 30,000 foot view. You say, this is the long term, we need to go there. And then you go and you say, okay, which of these 8 levers is going to help us get there? And more accurately, which combination of these levers will help us get there? And how can I use climate finance in each to, as a holistic impact, make the changes that I need that minimize the fiscal burdens on the countries that we're working in? We cannot go to developing countries and say, hey, we got a long-term transformation goal. You need to go deep in debt to achieve it. I mean, it's absurd on its face. And yet that's what some people think. But we need to discern how to be catalytic, get that private sector investment there on the country or the sector level. And finally, based on that analysis, come up with a comprehensive climate finance plan or strategy. It's only natural that each stakeholder grabs their piece of the climate finance pie, because it's often concessional, it's often sexy. We need to go up a level to be concerted and coordinated in our efforts there. So that's it for me. Next slide, please. But I do want to thank you all, and you know, my info is there. Please don't hesitate to reach out in the chat or afterwards. This is something that we're very keen on at the World Bank, and I think that it's the watchword in the climate finance community. Let's be more transformative, and we need to figure out practically on how to do that, because we are facing inertial forces, including within the MDBs themselves, who have their preferences and their practices. But if we go in this direction, based on what we've seen, there is a lot of potential to have that transformative impact we want. So again, thank you very much. That's it for me now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I really liked these 8 sets of climate levers of transformative action, and how you're actually striving to combat this silo thinking and have more holistic projects. We have time for perhaps 1 or 2 questions. Otherwise, I want to encourage you, Jonathan, to dive into the chat, because there are some questions there. But I want to make the space while being mindful of the time. If somebody wants to speak up and turn on their video and ask some question directly to Jonathan, maybe you can raise your hands. I do not see any hands raised.
Well, look, it's tough for me to go through the chats, but
yeah.
Just one. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there was one interesting question from Senda Ophir about actually the levers of transformative action and how they are seen as catalytic. So Zenda, would you like to have your question out loud?
Yes, I can do that. Well, it's obviously just as I said, one gets catalytic action and something that brings about catalytic action, but catalytic impact is not the same. So I was interested in the slide about catalytic impact, how it's defined and how you actually know that the impact is catalytic. And I was wondering if you use in any of your identification of catalytic action Donella Meadows' 12 leverage points, for example. So a little bit more about how you consider catalytic from not just the action, but the impact and what that actually means will be very helpful. And so I hope that's clear enough.
Well, it's an excellent question. I keep talking about catalytic and transformative and didn't come up with a robust definition of it. So you kind of called me out on that. When we initially started our work, we thought, for each of these 8 levers and the different financial instruments, we'll come up with a more or less robust leveraging factor. So if you spent $1 in innovation in this way, you'll get $10 leverage money. But it quickly became apparent that you just can't do that in a robust way. You just can't do it. So I'm gonna punt a little bit on your question, or not answer or defer, because I know we're going to hear from Daniel of GIZ, who's talking about transformation, and probably has more to share on this than ourselves. We did have a set of goals for what would define transformative. I didn't get them in this slide, but it's a good question, and to be honest, it would be good to flesh that out a little bit more, because I've been doing this for quite some time, and I've never worked on a project that didn't call itself catalytic and transformative. Of course, who's going to say they're not? So getting a clear definition of that is good. And just one more thing on that. The other report that I cited in my presentation, the one from a couple of years ago, did take a stab at, it was a screening tool to really just decide, do we invest in this climate project versus that climate project? And it did try to quantify what would be more catalytic. So you could take a look at that as well. My feeling is, it's more of an art than a science. So I'll stop there, but it's a great question.
Yeah, I agree. Please keep in mind that we'll have some time later for discussion and we can address these questions. For now, we need to move on to our next presentation, but Jonathan, if you feel like it and you have the time, you can address some of the questions that are in the chat. Some of them are pretty great. So now I want to invite Daniel Kehrer. He is an advisor on environmental and climate change subjects in the sectoral department at GIZ. So Daniel, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Ida, for the invitation. Very happy to be here and share with you what we have. Let me just share my screen as well. I hope it gets across. Okay, great. Yeah, I hope I can complement as best as possible from somehow broader sustainability perspective. I'm not so much an expert or specialize in climate finance, but we try to come up with the as holistic as possible idea concept about transformation. How did that happen? What is our, so to say, what was our TC journey? In the beginning, we had that question, what is our position on transformative change, since it popped up in many discussions and we didn't know. It was kind of difficult for us to answer that question, and soon we realized it's really a very broad question, way beyond the specific environmental issues or climate issues. And so we looked into the history of great transformations, industrialization, recent ones, the digitalization, the deliberate agendas about transformation. We looked into some of the framings in the different agendas. recently the Green Deal, of course, adding to that, to these agendas, and into different definitions, more from a science or practical background, and we try to make sense out of this in a kind of in a kind of generic way, coming up with this idea of transformabilities. What are design principles for transformative change, and how do they relate to other forms of change, and a general design principles for change. And this led to this first publication, this first guidance. And then we were tasked by the German Ministry of Environment to do a little further desk analysis and further concept work on climate finance. And we try to compare different institutions, global institutions, as you see here. How do they conceptualize this? What do they do? How do they do their projects in terms of paradigm shift and transformation, and try to synthesize from there and refine our idea about transformability is based on that. So I think these general transformabilities, we call them three of them mandatory. I think they're pretty much comparable to others as well, and yeah, a lot more, or some more so-called, we call essential transformabilities or design principles along with that. And yeah, we have a tool, or developed a tool for designing projects that kind of goes through these design principles. And this led to this second publication, the more recent one we have. And there's a lot of further discourse ongoing in different fora, including this forum, luckily. So it's really rather increasing, still increasing the discourse about how to do it and so on. So for us, what's the value proposition of TC? And it relates to the question, of course, why transformation? And obviously, because we assume we can't reach major goals without transformation, or with other way around, with sticking to incremental changes or reforms. Same for the SDG, or similarly, and similarly even up to the economy level, or the way we think economy in general, where we observe increasing questions whether recent economic paradigms can solve the problems we have in general, including inequalities, and the Corona crisis kind of shows or mirrors the same question to us. And it's really so the value proposition of transformation for some of the major goals we have is really to perform better on these goals than we could have with incremental change and reforms. So in a way, it's really, we should really repaint that picture in this way to address these major crises. It's really time for transformations, as probably all of you know. So the scope really is on transformation, not excluding the other forms of change, but really focusing on that, on these transformative agendas. So for example, from here to here, or from here to here, or something like that, or from here to here. So it's always, of course, we need to, within our projects, we should be able to allocate ourselves on a map like this. And of course, we talk about climate change in this context, but this is our narrow scope, but the broader scope really are all of these transformation fields on the different levels, because as indicated here, they're really highly interlinked. Economy has a large, or economic paradigms have major impact on climate change, and we won't solve that ambition probably without energy transitions, without mobility transitions, and so forth. So that should be really our major or broad scope when we talk about climate change as well. And first point for action in that regard is really to be really sharp within our projects in terms of what is the old system, what is the old paradigm, and what's the new one. And for example, moving further from just generally measuring mitigation, but really consequently saying we want greenhouse gas neutrality, and really linking that to other transformations that should serve that goal, like energy transition and so forth. The purpose of our work, of course, is to come up with to create learning in terms of approaches, methods, and intervention design, but also to provide impulse for transforming our work actually, and processes and the budgeting rationales and so on, and to be, of course, honest brokers in terms of the transformative agendas in the end for better impacts and solving the crisis. And the different target groups here, of course, like project developers, implementers, supporting units, commissioning parties, and in the end, society. So how, what are some reflections on how to get further from issue to action, or even better, how to act our way into new ways of thinking? And I see two major chapters here. One is the content in terms of what to do. And one major point to me would be to really consequently get more on this, or get higher up, if possible, to these levels of medium transformations, sectoral transformations, to really design projects or interventions that explicitly are a target mobility transformations, agriculture transformations, energy transition, and so on, and even up to the economy. And let me just provide one example, because it relates to this notion of deep system change. And let me cite Christian Felber, who says, "The one who causes the biggest damage has the biggest competitive advantage." And other way around, this means that competition as a paradigm for our economy, and even the way we collaborate sometimes, competition is one of the deepest drivers of externalities, including climate change. So what does it do? I mean, it creates winners and losers by definition. It motivates us to outcompete and take over. It further leads to focus on turnover and financial profit instead of well-being. It leads to motivation to grow and accelerate and produce cheap, and then to, of course, to continuous exploitation of people and resources, and acceleration of life production and consumption, and it leads to finally excessive consumption of the winners and left behind losers, and health issues and so forth. And this actually is pretty much our definition of unsustainable development. We get an unsafe planet, low ecological performance, high social and health costs and conflicts, and externalities are not even economically sustainable. So, and what we usually do with our projects is to add action in this on that level in terms of behavior change, for example, social compensation, social and environmental standards, but it's at that level. And so this is just an argument to really dive deeper as well with projects as far as possible, to even start here at the deep system paradigm shift, and ask and question, for example, competition as one example. And I think it's this is just one example how it could look like a new economic paradigm. And there are good examples in terms of very concrete examples in terms of how this could work out. And it could be good to link that discussion and other transformative discussions to questions of to dominant political narratives in different countries, and oftentimes it's about jobs, for example. Our recent paradigms, can they deliver on sustainable jobs? And of course, link it to economic sustainability and for example, regarding energy transitions, my colleagues in the energy department get quite sophisticated at the moment in terms of modeling, backcasting, and showing different energy mixes for the future and how this really pays off in already now in terms of economic benefits and so on. And really another point, explicitly try to really explicitly work towards mainstreaming and scaling, get new ideas into a mainstream as we heard already. And I think more boundary agency at the science policy interfaces or science society policy interfaces, we would really need that. Institutions and people and so on who can facilitate between them to make it to create that big picture we need for transformation, and really getting hands-on large-scale learning and social change. It's really still a great challenge to think in terms of value shifting and creating large-scale social change. But we managed for CFCs, for example, and it should be possible for climate change as well. Again, getting hands on just transition, I can just really confirm that as well. And there are different potential action fields we could really further engage in trying to do that. And now coming to how to do it, to types and project types and processes. As we know, this is tremendous complexity we talk about. We have these different strategies for different environments. We have the recent paradigm with the typical project cycle. And we can see that actually the recent project cycles, and we think about interventions, really are optimized for the simple and complicated world. Please feel free to look into this later more deeply. I'm just hurrying a bit. And we are, and being in that classical project cycle, we regularly ran into that impact complexity trap. We have very smart impact promises, actually predictions of the future. We run into the complex reality. We get deviation from what we promised. We have the impulse to get even smarter and better predictions of the future, and so on. It's kind of vicious circle. And on the other side, we realize we are not in that simple and complicated world. We are in the VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And the strategies we still use to apply don't work in that world very well. So in a way, so we can ask, how much time do we actually have for conventional project cycles? Thank you very much. In order to get to the goals we have when we talk about climate change. And so we really, this is advocacy for more process orientation to transform our work as well, engaging in co-creative cycles as much as possible to work in this chaotic and complex world, and to start small and get bigger and bigger with more and more of these cycles, and really to try to come up with brave experiences and experiments that try to answer the question of how to do that. I've tried to line up a little bit how this could look like, the new paradigm. Please feel free to read later some examples of how we could just, for example, test more flexible fund allocation to the places where it's really needed at the time. And yeah, I think we should really more rather think in partnerships, emerging partnerships and interventions within different transformative or transformation fields, as opposed to the classical projects that will deliver something. We have some tools already, methodologies that might get more hands on the complex world, but of course much more is to be done. And I think we really need brave and co-creative more experiments of how content and processes could work in this for these great challenges. Thank you very much. Back over to you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So I want to open the space for maybe just one question, because we are a little bit behind. So I'm gonna check in the chat if there is, oh, there is one, and I really like it. But I actually, from Cecilia Lozada, I really want to hold this question for the end when our speakers are gonna give us their final reflections, but I'm gonna say it now. It's the recommendation from the panelists in regards to the climate business sectors that could have the most significant transformative potential in Latin America. I mean, I am Mexican and obviously I care about this answer. So is it renewable energy, waste management, food systems, industry, and so on. So maybe you can hold on to this thought and touch it on your final remarks. I do not see any other question directed to Daniel, but I don't know if anybody wants to go on camera. If not, then we will move on to the discussion. Yep. Oh,
I believe Neil Bird has one, I believe.
Christian Mati, I see his little hand. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I just have a question regarding the last slides, but also I have browsed very quickly the report on transformative projects. So I just wonder how you can move into the complexity when you talk about portfolio, when you need to define maybe the difference between an experiment, an intervention, a project, program, a service, an activity. I think there is a need to navigate that complexity somehow and be more precise to when we talk about portfolios. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, do you want to react to that?
Okay, thank you very much. Should I react to that first question as well or later?
I think the one from Christian, we can address the one from Cecilia later.
Okay, let me just give it a try for if I got you correctly for programming and portfolio versus complexity. And I think I'm really convinced that the whole issue of programming and portfolio development should start small and flexible and remain flexible as well as much as possible, and be as ambitious as possible at the same time. I think this whole issue of creating huge project proposals and based on programming ideas and portfolio development. If we just continue following that logic, if we, for example, say we need to get more ambitious, even more ambitious, and get even more bigger projects and more funding, like maybe 100 million projects, 200 million projects to really reasonably try to solve entire transformation fields and within different countries. If we just follow that logic, the preparation time for these projects will increase, and the predictions to be made and the investment risks will even increase if we promise 200 million, then it's even higher investment risk, and we will try to even more ascertain ourselves that everything has been done to create great impact and accountability and so on. So I'd really argue to going back completely and find really smart ways to directly intervene and not spend too much time on programming, on process or impact promises and on huge project proposals, but really find smart ways to directly intervene, start small, have flexible fund allocation, and then take it further and take it as far as possible. I hope it touched upon your question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel. So we don't have more space for live questions, but I want to encourage you, Daniel, to look at the chat. There are two great questions, one from Neil Bird about disruption and one from Ron Vandenberg about introducing the concept of level playing field. So maybe you want to take a look at that. In the meantime, I want to introduce you to the next section of the webinar. So we have heard a little bit about 3 frameworks that aim to channel transformational change within climate finance initiatives. And we know that there are many more examples and approaches in the topic. And we actually would like to hear them. So we are now turning to you, to the audience, to attempt something that is called a chat waterfall. Now, this is only successful if all of you engage. So we are counting on you, and we have high hopes. So for the next couple of minutes, I would like all the participants to craft and put into the chat an answer for the following question. So Shelby, if you can, yes, great. So where do we need most guidance or experimentation to translate transformational change thinking into action? So I'm gonna give you a couple of minutes to craft, and I really want to see that chat coming alive. Great, I see them now. Maybe you can consider some of the elements that we heard during our discussion. If you have experiences, for example, on experimentation, on learning, on harvesting insights from the action in the field. And actually, if you have some, for example, some examples that you want to share, some, as we call it, bright spots from which we can explore and learn from. Great, I see the answers. I really like this one, and I want to bring, I think it's Christine. So nice to hear from you, Christine. That says, define clear experiments that bring unusual actors. Would you like to come forward and turn on your video to explore your answer a little bit more?
It's actually Felicity who has written that, Nasiba.
Oh, yes.
Yes. That was
Sorry.
yeah, no, I was thinking what we really need is we need the people to be brave to work with unusual actors. So for example, to have if we're talking about finance for the World Bank, to really look at how do we work with national development banks, which currently finance everything outside of their own countries, and finance business models which are per se complex. For example, we were talking about resilience. That often means working with micro farmers on things that are complicated like agriculture. So what is the business model that could make it work? And usually with financial business models, you have to hide the complexity behind a big coherent network, so which is managed by a go-to one-shop NGO, and beneath that one-shop NGO is lots of other NGOs and lots of complexity. So, but the target thing would be to try and how do we get, the question is how do we get national development banks to invest in their own countries, that kind of thinking, and then moving beyond loans, as Jonathan kind of pointed out, to why aren't we using more credit guarantees? Why aren't we using, the full financial toolbox? So that's on the finance. That would be an example of what I was trying to say. And then on the sector approach, I always get a bit frustrated about sectors because sectors are interlinked. Like if let's talk about a city, but then you forget that the city is actually an open system which connects to the country. So then the question is how to get the vertical right. Like people are doing people are doing the sectors, but then how do you get the horizontal right? Can we have a vertical and horizontal mini project at the level of community and then scale it up, get the people involved, and that would address just transformation. And I think there was a really good thing in the GIZ study around education. So so I'm just trying to give examples of what I put in the chat because you can all read what I put, but it's really like, let's look at the unusual communities, but then really drive an experiment, which means wait till you can get through your theory of change to some kind of measurement of impact. So you're talking about a collaboration commitment of 7 to 12 years, right? And that is what I don't see in communities, that commitment of collaboration across diverse actors. People want projects done between 2 to 5 years, right? So this is something my challenge would be.
Yeah, I completely agree, Felicity. Thank you for that. And something that I have found in my own experience in my field of work in Mexico is that, for example, the forest sector is regarded as so risky in terms of investment. But we did manage to get some national development banks to invest in forest industry, but it took quite a lot of, foreign investment that was leveraging and increasing the confidence for them. And it was actually by the hand of guarantee funds and other, risk mitigating tools that was possible. But it is, we still have yet to see these to catalyze greater investments at the national level. So it is for sure a big, barrier to tackle. So I really like your comment, Rob, about addressing the opposition to transformational change. How would you define this resistance? If we are all talking about, okay, we need to be transformational, where does this resistance come from?
Would you want me to come in, Nasibe, on this issue? Sorry. And I had problems finding my unmute button. Sorry. Yes, I'm concerned that actually in a lot of circles, there is resistance against transformational change and against initiatives in this direction, because it's way too expensive. It's based on questionable science. It's based on, etc. The populist arguments against doing anything about climate change. And this goes into the ridiculous as well. Like we've now talked about climate action for 30 years, so let's stop. As if that solves the problem. But it's really quite popular in circles, and there needs to be a broader support for transformational change in order to get the kind of support that Daniel asked for, which is basically, if we want to do adaptive and complex things, and we get the response that every penny needs to be accounted for, and we need to have blueprints right from the start, the old-fashioned projects, otherwise we'll just be throwing our money away. This requires, I think, a strategy that we need to have as well. On top of explaining transformational change, we also need to be able to support it in these policy discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. That's so on point. I see a recurring comment or along the lines of thinking outside the box, being brave. I see working outside of the traditional. So either, I'm seeing comments from Steve, from Mike, and also from Daniel. So if either of you want to come forward on, because we know that we need to be disruptive, we know that we need to be non-traditional, but how does that look in a scenario where also other actors, fiscal actors or regulations are in place? Do either of you want to come forward to comment a little bit more on that?
Nasibe, it's Mike here. Yeah, just in terms of this notion of bold, I think that a much clearer line of sight from the sort of planetary boundaries that we face, the kind of social impacts that they may have, or the kind of opportunities for, or space for acting that creates. And then the kind of the way that the economy distributes I suppose the benefits and harms in the transition processes. And that line of sight, I'm not sure that we're getting to grips with in the kind of transformational change work. We often kind of focus on one sector, so within a social sector. And I think that some of the kind of complex diagrams that Daniel was showing start to speak across, and that we need to recognize that transformational change is going to take quite significant engagement with environment, society, and economy, and how they very closely, in fact, that they're embedded inside each other, not just that they're three sort of circles like a Venn diagram. So that's the kind of bold that I'm talking about.
I guess I'm talking about the need for humbleness, and the World Bank to think of itself as, and the international development banks to think of themselves as institutions designed for a different era. And what is their transformation to be able to usher in something other than a development framework, which I just don't think that it's possible to suddenly jump out of it. But the co-creative multi-stakeholder energy without a development expertise framework, working with local people, I really liked what Hassan said, is critical. And I just think that there's real problems with the IDBs thinking they can do that.
Go ahead, Daniel.
If I may, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. I think the same, to be honest, the same more or less applies to us too, and to many organizations. I mean, when Henry Ford in the 1910s designed that, or more or less invented that management paradigm, it was optimized for his fabric creating cars, constructing cars, and it worked for that. It's from the 1910s, more or less, and then we had invention of bureaucracy that served well on certain goals and so on, and I think more or less many or almost all of the bigger organizations are still function more or less within that management paradigm we've kind of feel, which is out of time, and it's really I would be really interested to hear more from different bigger organizations how it could be possible to create that space for brave space for experiments to that slowly but surely change that management paradigm. We try, as I said, we try at the moment to create some space within projects. It's you know, it's quite some work, of course, to convince commissioning parties as well to create that, to be brave as well, and create that, you know, blank space, experimentation space, where we can't say in the beginning and can't nail down the return of investment specifically in the beginning. But we can just say we will do our best and apply all the design principles and focus on very good processes and facilitation. So rather do something like a process promise. But yeah, it really takes bravery, and I'd be interested how we feel that could be possible in bigger, with bigger ships like World Bank, GIZ, and commissioning parties and so on.
Thank you, Daniel, so much. So I see 2 raised hands from Jonathan and Zakir. I just want to send you one more prompt question and you can start typing in the chat. Not sure that we'll have time to discuss that one, but I really want to hear your answers. So Shelby, if you can put that up.
Hello.
So just 1 minute. So the question is, what would it take to equip climate finance programs and to incorporate transformational change thinking into their work? I think this is quite relevant to what Steve and Daniel mentioned, and I'm thinking that it's something along the lines of what Jonathan might say. So with this in mind, do start typing on the chat, and then I'll go with Zakir. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and for the opportunity to join the high-level dialogue. Being a local people, being a practitioner at the local level, what we see the transformation partly in the World Bank, since Ms. Kristalina Georgieva took over the power of World Bank. We see some transformation and some wish from World Bank, but wish is not enough at the local level. From World Bank, we expect that not 8% of climate finance will go to the local level, and 90% of 8% goes to the local elites. Only 2%, 10% of 8% goes to the local people, just as a day labor. So local people should have to be the stakeholder. They have their capacity to invest at the local level. Local people are the big investor. History says and study says that during after a disaster event in Bangladesh particularly, local households, they are the big investors to reconstruction, not the World Bank or ADB or someone else. It's the local people, so they have the capacity to be a partner of any initiative. And my point is clear. As a local people, I do want climate finance goes to the local level directly, so the cost will be reduced, and the proposal, we don't have capacity to invest $1 million to submit a proposal for $5 million. No, that's not the way how it will work. The proposal should be easy for the local people, maybe in their local dialect also. Thank you. Back to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Zakir, so much. And this is so important to also, integrate the local stakeholder into investments, actually, in decision-making processes. So, Jonathan?
Okay, thanks. A couple of people mentioned the challenges of large organizations such as the World Bank making the changes that we need. And well, I'm well fully aware of that. It's hard to move a super tanker in the ocean I can say that there's sort of a renewed push on climate change, even in the last 3, 4, 5 months within the World Bank. So I hope we're getting there. There's inertial forces, and as I mentioned before, to a person with a nail, excuse me, to a person with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And going back to Daniel's point about Henry Ford developing an assembly line to build a 1910 product, a 1910 automobile, and we're still using it. Change is hard. And just Zakir's point as well, that's something that we're very aware of. It's a flaw that we have. It's not easy. If it was easy, we would do it. And the problem is that, we're a large organization that needs to move at scale. Big loans are good. You get down to $1 million, $100,000, or even $5 million. It's not really what we're set up to, but that's something that we have to do more of. There's no question. And, linking to the just transition aspect of it, we definitely need to do more of that, or it's just not going to be just. And then absent the participation of the locals, it won't succeed either. So you're fully spot on, but just to be frank, we cannot turn on a switch and say, okay, we'll do that, because our systems, and systems count, are oriented towards bigger is better in scale. But the point is very well made and very well taken.
Yeah, definitely. It is a process and we are all in it. So the more we can learn from each other, the better. So we are drawing near to the close. I will ask for your patience because I think we're going to finish some 5 minutes later than the time that we said. So please bear with us and stay until the end. I want to give the floor for 1 or 2 minutes, more 1 than 2 minutes, to our speakers to maybe some final reflections, and then please stick around because we have some announcements on future events. So Jonathan, you want to have a little bit of a recap, additional thoughts, how to move forward from thinking to action on transformational change?
Sure, I'll give some thoughts, although I think I more or less did, and I think that the conversation in the chat and people speaking up suggests that we're all sort of on the same page here. I would be interested to hear people's views, offline, if you want to approach me, because I can say that this is a direction that we are going in the World Bank, and talking to the other MDBs, it's not just us. Change is slow, so let's be honest. But if we do it alone, if we go it alone, absent the kind of involvement from people such as yourselves, interested stakeholders such as yourselves, including, again, going back to Zakir's point of the local participation, it's simply not going to work. So a little bit watch this space, because it is a reinvigorated issue within the World Bank, climate change in general, but I'm not promising any miracles, because we are a large politically politicized bureaucracy, and let's be realistic there. There's only so much we can do, but thanks you all for joining it, and thanks again for you Nasibe and the others from the TPLC to organize this. We really love these exchanges, so thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you very much from my side too. Thank you to all the comments and thoughts and ideas. I really think we should make some space to dream and to be brave. Otherwise, we can't be transformative and transform our work as well if we can't make space for that. For these kinds of innovations, we certainly need, and so it's really an ongoing journey, as was said. It's to me and there's another paradigm shift, a potential one coming across. To me it's really much more less a question of knowledge to action, but more a question of action to knowledge. Let's act our way into new ways of thinking and acting and so on. So it's really a way of further co-production to come up with good ideas how we could make this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was greatly put. I loved it. Thank you, Jonathan and Daniel. So as we learned today, to achieve climate action, we have to strive for a deep transformation at systems level even, and throughout all sectors involved. And this often requires piloting of innovative models and actually mid-course adjusting to advance towards transformational change in climate action. All these experiences can, of course, provide direction for institutions and also for practitioners, as you were commenting in the chat, to move from the what to the how, right? From concept to practice. I really hope that today's insights and examples can support your own work. For us, these spaces are so valuable because the TCLP is moving across 2021 with new partnerships, with new products, and also with new events. And we really hope to see you, all of you, during the next months, participating and providing insights and ideas in upcoming events. I will now ask Regan Smurthwaite from the CIF Administrative Unit to share some of these events so you can be aware of it.
Great, thank you, Nasibe. And thank you to our great speakers. I appreciate everyone for their participation in the chat, and we just want to make sure that you know about some of our upcoming events. We have a concepts, methods, and metrics interest group webinar combined with the Clean Energy interest group on energy-specific signals of transformational change coming up on April 7th. And we also, very excitingly, have a spring workshop, virtual workshop scheduled, catalyzing transformational change on the 25th through the 27th of May. So please save that date in your calendars. In place in the morning East Coast time, and we'll be sending out more information as we have it. But this virtual interactive workshop will bring together experts from development finance institutions, country governments, civil society, academia, etc., to explore what transformational change looks like in practice, as we've been discussing in part today, to co-create insights and tools that can support practitioners to really design initiatives, programs, and projects with transformation in mind. And if you, to make sure that you're getting all the information, if we can go to the next slide, please do email me so you can get on the Transformational Change Learning Partnership mailing list. That's where we send all of our updates on events and analytical work that we produce. And in particular, you can join one or more of the interest groups that we have available on concepts, methods, and metrics, clean energy, just transition, and resilience and landscapes. I will put my email in the chat as we close, but I encourage you to join this distribution list if you're not already, so we can continue having this conversation and advance transformational change and climate action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Regan. And we have 1 minute to spare. Yes. So thank you so much, Regan. Please, as she's mentioning, do stay in touch. Do keep engaged. I loved today's chat. Please keep this going through email, chat among yourselves, and we expect to see you in further and future events. Thank you so much to the speakers. Thanks to the audience for your times, for your insights, your thoughts, and thank you, of course, of the organizing team for all the work to make this happen. It was great. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see each other really soon. Goodbye.